These Japan-Korea tensions, we've seen them for years, whether it's historic or territorial, but we never really saw it escalate so much into the economic sphere of things. So what will it take to break this standoff?
Yeah, I've not heard anyone make a plausible case that the official reasons Japan gives for the trade dispute, their restrictions on exports to Korea, are really about sanctions breaking by South Korea. I think everyone acknowledges the real problems are historic problems. This is Japan reacting to the South Korean Supreme Court decisions at the end of last year, which said that forced laborers were still owed compensation.
So what will it take to break the standoff? Will the United States need to intervene here? And what can Washington realistically do?
Yeah, I don't think the U.S. can actually intervene. I think what the U.S. can do is to try to provide good offices, have conversations with the governments of Seoul and Tokyo to discuss the common interests they have, and maybe try to provide some kind of a venue for conversation about the historical issues, which are still out there to be discussed.
Do you think there's a degree of pride getting in the way of common sense here, and how dangerous is that?
It's not just pride. I think it's tempting from the outside to say that Japan and Korea are acting in an emotional or irrational way, but these historical problems, as you said, are very deep and unresolved. You know, you can try to say that the past should be put behind you, but you never actually get past the history. You have to manage it or deal with it or live with it. At the same time, you're dealing with current contemporary problems and challenges.
So is in such an emotionally charged environment, I mean, what does a circuit breaker look like? We've seen tensions between these two countries flare up before and then calm down again.
Well, in the past, there were South Korean politicians who knew Japanese politicians personally, and they could talk behind the scenes. And that's not the case now so much. So it's difficult for them to engage in dialogue. And both sides have some domestic political restraints in what they can do to try to find accommodation. I think what probably actually has to happen at this point is there should be conversation among the Japanese government, South Korean government, the Japanese corporations involved, and the Korean forced laborers to see what would be a fair settlement of some sort. You know, Japan would like to argue this is all settled in 1965, but forced labor law is not a settled issue. It's even been heard in California cases, so it's not done yet. And the South Korean government also has some responsibility for the fact that laborers were not paid for their labor. Because when Japan gave South Korea money, the South Korean government under Park Chung-hee did not give it to the laborers directly. So there's still some issues to be had.
So, Mark, now we're seeing South Korea and Japan both removing each other from trusted partners economically, the white list and so forth. What does that mean economically? Because we haven't seen any more clarity from Japan of how this would actually get enforced and how severe this could be.
Yeah, you're correct. We've not seen yet how Japan's actually going to implement it. So if Japan issues licenses quickly, then the impact could be more minimal. But if Japan slows licenses down or doesn't issue them or foot drags, there could be some pretty serious consequences. It's difficult for Korea because they don't want to be too alarmist. They need to assure investors and their shareholders that they can manage no matter what. But at the same time, the problems have to be elevated and taken seriously.
Yeah, there's an interesting point here that Samsung has recently secured UV photoresist from Belgium, and this is a critical ingredient in the use of chip making. So we can already see that the supply chain is starting to reorganize. So does this illustrate a risk for Japan? Because as you mentioned, there's no interpersonal relationships there at the political level like there used to be. So even if this is resolved, is there a risk that South Korea might not then go back to what it sees as an unreliable partner and these supply chains remain permanently reorganized?
Well, it wouldn't be permanent. I think you're right. There'll be a search clearly for other suppliers, and that will go on, whether it's Belgium or whether it's China. The Korean corporations will have to look for alternate supplies if Japan does not grant licenses quickly enough. But probably efficiencies are still there between Japan and South Korea, or if they can get this problem behind them, they could probably get back to a more traditional trading relationship. The two countries actually need each other.